This is Jack. Jack is happy. Jack is happy because he's in his comfort zone. Go, Jack, go. Jack is a good driver. However, he has been stopped for DUI, driving underinflated. Jack loves to go to church. Go to church, Jack. Go! Jack used to enjoy visiting with friends over a good meal at church. However, he stopped going to meals at church because meeting new people is out of Jack's comfort zone. Jack used to volunteer in the children's ministry. However, he stopped that because children are outside of his comfort zone. Oh, look at them giggle. That's gonna make Jack cry. Jack tried attending a small group one time. However, the leader said, "Jack, why don't you share with us?" And that, you guessed it, was outside of his comfort zone. Jack has many dreams, desires, and ambitions. He wants his life to count for something. However, that will never happen because life lived inside the comfort zone is life lived outside of God's will.
I know we find that a little comical, but some of y'all have some big bubbles, just saying. I know, because I've asked you to do something outside your comfort zone. Well, today is the start of a new series. For this month, we're going to be going through the book of Acts and going along some of Paul's journey. So we entitled it On the Road with Paul. And each week, we're going to tackle something different from his journey. And if you haven't caught on, today, it's about when God forces you out of your comfort zone. Now, we know that Paul wrote most of the New Testament. He became a missionary that ended up starting churches all over, numerous countries. Somebody described him as the original church planter because although he went around and started these churches through sharing the gospel and the good news, he didn't stay very long to pastor them. He brought the good news and then he empowered other people to stay and grow the church and to keep it going. It was typically a local. In fact, the church at Philippi was born out of Paul's teaching to a woman named Lydia. Now, Lydia was a trader in purple cloths, which was very expensive at that time due to the day. I believe some scriptures say it was purple linen. But Lydia ended up helping to go and fund that early church in Philippi. And Paul wasn't an original disciple of Jesus, as many of you think. I had somebody look at the Last Supper one time and say, "Which one's Paul?" And I'm like, he wasn't there. That was not a dinner he was invited to. That was not a table he was welcome to sit at that time. He didn't sit at the Last Supper with Jesus. In fact, he was not a supporter of Christ at all. So to understand who Paul is, we're going to go back to the beginning of his story where he shows up in Acts chapter 9. And I just want to clarify as I'm reading this, names were changed after something significant happened in someone's life. We know that Peter's name was originally Simon, and it was changed to Peter. Well, in this story, he's going to be referred to as Saul, which was his original name. It will later become Paul. But I just wanted to clear that up as I'm reading Saul, and you go, wait a minute, she said we're going to talk about Paul today. Same guy, different name. So in the beginning of the story, chapter 9, verse 1. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters from the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, actually, I'm going to pause there. For those of you who don't know what this means, he asked for letters from the high priest. This would have been like giving Paul a blank check. That anybody he thought was a follower of Christ, man or woman, this was his way to take them into custody, to arrest them, to take them and make them a prisoner. He didn't even always have to have facts, but he was just given a blank check that he could go ahead and collect anybody that he thought was a follower of Christ. Now, I know today we're used to warrants and you have to have specific names and addresses. This was like a blank check version of that, is what he's been given. So he's on his trip to Damascus, and it says, as he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? Saul asked. I am Jesus whom you are persecuting, he replied. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound, but they did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. Now we could just stop there with the story, but God wasn't done there. He didn't just stop Saul from what Saul was doing that was wrong. He continued on. In verse 10, it says, in Damascus there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called to him in a vision, Ananias. Yes, Lord, he answered. The Lord told him, go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision, he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight. Now, I want to help you understand, Ananias was a follower of the way. He was a disciple. He was a very devout disciple. Could you imagine suddenly being told this? You're just praying and God speaks to you and he says, I want you to go and see this man because you're going to lay your hands on him. And here's Ananias' reply in verse 10. Lord, Ananias answered, I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. And he has come here with authority from the chief priest to arrest all who call on your name. But the Lord said to Ananias, go. This man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings, and to the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my name. Then Ananias went to the house and entered it. Placing his hands on Saul, he said, Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you were coming here, has sent me so that you may see again and be filled with the Holy Spirit. Immediately, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. He got up and was baptized, and after taking some food, he regained his strength. Saul spent several days with the disciples in Damascus. At once he began to preach in the synagogues that Jesus is the Son of God. All those who heard him were astonished and asked, isn't this the man who raised havoc in Jerusalem among those who call on his name? And hasn't he come here to take them as prisoners to the chief priests? Yet Saul grew more and more powerful and baffled the Jews living in Damascus by proving that Jesus is the Messiah. The word of God for the people of God. So here's this guy with these blank checks that he could go ahead and arrest anybody he thinks is following Jesus. Now, I know there's a joke we always say, if you were accused of being a follower of Christ, would there be enough evidence to convict you? But he didn't even need the evidence. If he thought you were, he could take you as a prisoner. And he had this letter giving him that permission. And I couldn't imagine being Ananias sitting there prayerfully spending time with God and God suddenly go, you're going to go heal him. I love how Ananias is like, I've heard about him. Have you ever thought of that, where God's going to call you into something and you're like, wait a minute, God, I know how messy that is. I don't want to go there. Or I don't want to talk to those people. I mean, we've read about it in the book of Jonah, right? When God calls him to go talk to Nineveh, and Jonah's like, you're going to heal them, you're going to save them, and I don't want anything to do with them. I don't like them. But here is Ananias being called to go heal Saul. And poor Ananias, I felt so bad for him. He just got sucked right into it. But imagine how much faith it took him to follow and to go. To walk into the person who had the power to imprison him. The person who could change his life forever and have him killed. And yet he went. Now, Saul was not a failure in the world's eyes. We might be thinking that as we hear this, that, oh man, what kind of guy is this that he's persecuting all the early followers? But he was a Jew, and he believed very strongly in what the scriptures had taught him. And he was so adamant about this that he was willing to go and start persecuting those who were speaking out against it. So in the world's eyes, he wasn't considered a failure. He was doing a great job. Look at how many people he collected. Look at how many he imprisoned. But to the early way, How did Ananias say it? He's been creating havoc. In God's eyes, he wasn't successful, was he? What about you? Do you consider yourself successful in the world's eyes or in God's eyes? Years ago, I was what would be defined as successful in the world's eyes. I was working as a project manager of government contracts. I had job sites all over our country. New York City and San Francisco were my two main locations that I worked. By the world standards, I was doing a great job. I'd been with my company at this point 5 years and been promoted twice. I was in my third position. I was overseeing a contract in San Francisco worth $18 million. That was my daily job. I'd fly out to job sites and tell all the union guys what needed to be done. I'd go out to our factories and work with our factory guys or our engineers or sales. I loved what I did. I liked having a corporate Amex. I liked being feared on the job sites when I showed up because my hard hat was the clean one, so they always knew who I was. By the world standards, I was doing a great job. And then during that time, I started pastoring part-time on the weekends. I was feeling this tug into ministry, and I reluctantly said, okay, God, I'll do it kind of sort of part-time. So my first appointment was 10 hours a week. I'd preach once on Sunday and help lead a Bible study midweek, and that was it. Did that for a year. And I just kept feeling this pull of, no, I need you to be more into ministry. And I remember there came a point where I said, you know what, God, if you want me to choose, you're going to have to close this door. Because I really like what I'm doing, and I'm doing a good job at it. It's something I'm proud of. I was in an industry where it was all men project managers. I was the only female, and I held up to a lot of what they put me through. I loved it. And then, as I was praying through it and realizing I was in a comfort zone, I didn't want to leave my nice 401k, my nice salary, my corporate Amex, the travel I got to do all the time. I would fly out on Monday and fly back on Friday and go preach in Amish country over the weekend and then go right back to it. It was hilarious. I would go from being in New York City to dodging road apples out in Holmes County. It's a little bit of everything. I liked the bonuses, and I liked the salary and the authority. And in the world's eyes, I was doing great. But I told God he could choose. I said, close the door you want closed, because I'm not going to close it because my ego loves what I'm doing. And I knew it was my ego, but I still liked it. And I remember it was a Monday morning. I had just flown back from San Francisco the Friday before. When I was there that Friday, remember that contract I said was $18 million? Well, they needed more sites added. So it was going to double our contract, another $18 million on top of it. And I'd done the verbal agreement with my counterpart, and I was supposed to come in Monday and sign the contract. This would have been a huge win. This was one of our big projects. And despite my performance being stellar, and despite having just landed this huge contract, I walked in that day ecstatic and feeling a little arrogant, because this had just happened. And I got laid off. Because our company was doing layoffs across the board, and they needed somebody out of every department. And despite my performance, myself and one other person were chosen. This took me completely out of my comfort zone. But it was funny because as I was being told that I was losing my job, I had this peace just kind of wash over me like, all right, door's been closed. Where are we going, God? You are about to take me completely out of my comfort zone. I'm used to having power and authority and being in boardrooms, and now you want me to wash feet. What is this going to look like? What is it going to look like to go from what I've known for so long to now something completely opposite, where my ego is not welcome to come with me? Now, I am not claiming to be anywhere near as impactful as Paul's ministry has been. But I will tell you, being pulled out of that comfort zone, the one that I was not willing to leave on my own, just like Saul wasn't willing to leave on his own, it affected me. And I've gotten to see the lives that have been affected by my ministry. And sometimes after you walk away from a situation, you're like, I don't know if I made any difference, but I did what I could. I hope it, me. And there was a situation that happened back in 2021. And it took me a little bit to do the math. I'm like, when did that happen? And I'm pretty sure it was 21. I could be wrong. But we had a new exchange student from Germany with us. And we were meeting my other daughter. We were all going to have lunch at our favorite Asian place. It was out in Worcester. And I remember both of my daughters and our exchange student were with us, and we had just finished our meal, and we're leaving the restaurant. And as we're driving down out of the parking lot, across the street in a closed shopping plaza, I see a man and woman fighting. And I drove away. And I got about a block down, and I went, no, I got to go back. And my kids had no clue. They weren't paying attention. And I turned around, and I drove back, and I pulled up, and I rolled the window down. And I said, everything okay? And he goes, oh, yeah, we're fine. And she goes, no, we're not. And I said, hop in, come on. And she ran to my car, and she hopped in, and my exchange student is looking at my daughters, and she goes, does your mom always do this? And Em goes, yeah, pretty much. And this woman who I've never met before hops in my car, and as he runs to my car, I said, don't worry, she's got your number, right? And I said, she'll call you, and I sped off. I had no idea what was going on. I found out later that she was in town from Texas, and her kid was going to the College of Worcester. So I drove her back to the campus to where her child was that she'd just dropped off so that she could go ahead and make arrangements and figure out how to get home. And I gave her my number, and I said, if you ever need anything, call me. And honestly, I thought I'd never hear from that woman again. And I've always wondered, what happened? Did she go back to him? Was their marriage abusive? Were they married? I didn't know the details. And yesterday, I was on TikTok because I got brave and posted a TikTok recently. And she commented on it. And I remember looking at the name, and she sent me a private message, and I sent one back, and I'm like, is this, and I can't pronounce her first name right, so we'll just call her Anna. I said, is this Anna? And she wrote back, yes. And I said, her comment on my TikTok, I think it was something to the effect of, you're beautiful. And I wrote back, I said, how are you? And her answer to me this morning was, so blessed. God had to pull me out of my comfort zone and put me on a path that I would have never chosen. And God pulls all of us out of our comfort zones to put us where he needs us. And yet we spend so much time fighting him for that because we want to stay in our comfort zones. And I know it was comical with the balloon and that, but the reality is that's what we try to do. We want to get to have that transformation that the scriptures tell us about, but we don't want to change anything. We want to make sure we get to sit in the same place on Sunday. We want to have the same routines. Don't ask me to change, God. You can use me as long as I don't have to change, right? Several years ago, I was interviewed by the conference for an article, and as I was talking freely with this person, they quoted me, and it was a quote I did not intend to have go into print. In fact, when the article came out, I kind of cringed, but I was quoted as saying, I have been called to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. And it went out on the conference website for everybody to read, and I'm like, oops. But beloved, that is why I'm here. I'm here to make you uncomfortable. I'm not a hellfire and brimstone kind of pastor, you know that. But I do want to ask the questions that make you stop and go, oh, wait a minute. I do want to kind of push you and say, I want to see you grow in your faith. I want to see you grow in your relationship with Christ. And see, routines don't help us grow. Staying in our comfortable places don't help us grow. See, I want to push you and force you to step out of the boat the way Peter did. Somebody said Peter failed because he sank when he stepped out of the boat to try and walk on water. Yeah, guess what? There were 11 boat potatoes that failed bigger. That's John Ortberg's phrase, boat potatoes, and I loved that. There were 11 who didn't even try. Beloved, are we sitting in the boat, keeping it nice and comfy? Or are we taking that step? Even though we might fail, are we trying? See, I want you to try new things for God. Paul's encounter with Jesus forced him out of his familiar territory. Physically, he went blind. Socially, his entire network is now gone. He can't go back to any of the people he was working with. Spiritually, he's not got a relationship with Christ. He was pulled out of every comfort zone he could imagine. It's not like he could go hang out with the same friends anymore because they expect him to persecute the followers because they were Jews. And he's like, nope, I'm with them now. In fact, later in the story, it talks about that. In fact, the early believers were worried for Saul's safety. And at one point, it says, where did it go? Later in chapter 9 still. He talked and debated with Hellenistic Jews, but they tried to kill him. When the believers in the early church saw this, they took him down to Caesarea and sent him off to Tarsus. They stuck him on a boat and sent him home. Like, you're going to get killed if you stay here. You're really upsetting everybody. He lost everything. God pulled him out of every comfort zone imaginable because he needed him. He needed his way of speaking, and he needed his message and his testimony. You know, some of us believe that ministry is writing a check and sending it off to somebody else to do. But ministry of check writing is very different than the ministry of looking somebody in the eyes while you serve them. Because there's never going to be a set of eyes you look into that aren't attached to a person that Christ died for. There's never going to be a person that you come across that God doesn't love tremendously. They may drive you crazy, but God still loves them. And see, it's when we step out of our comfort zones that we are going to grow as followers of Christ. I have seen more life in our youth here at this church when they get to serve than anything else. If you ask them to sit and do a Bible study, it's a challenge to get questions answered, right, guys? They're going to be silent because they're proving the point. But you ask them to put together homeless kits or to meal pack for emergency situations or to help with yard work, man, those kids are on it. They are eager to be hands and feet to do mission and ministry. And beloved, that's what I want from us. They know what it looks like to get out of your comfort zone and they go do it. Doing mission work, serving, being the hands and feet of Christ, that's where we're going to be transformed. We can't be transformed sitting in our comfort zones. So what about us as adults in the room? Are we as fired up as the kids? Some days yes, some days no. And that's part of your challenge this week. I want to challenge you to get out of your comfort zone. I'm not sure what your comfort zone is. You know it better than I do. And I don't want you to need a whole Damascus Road experience where God's going to make you go blind to get this through your head. I don't want you to have to go through what Saul did. So I'm going to ask you some questions this week as your challenge, because there's some things I want you to figure out. I want you to figure out, what have I asked of you, or what has God asked of you that makes you uncomfortable? That one should be an easy one to figure out. Is it a way that you're living your life? Is it a way that you're serving or not serving God? What is it that's making you uncomfortable? And then my next question is, what's holding you back? Is it fear? Is it shame? Maybe there's a lie that you have been told, that you've been believing, that you're not good enough, or you're not equipped enough, or you just don't know enough. Maybe you're telling it to yourself so that you don't have to step out of your comfort zone. And I want to ask you, why can't you step in and be God's hands and feet? Paul went on to write so many of the letters in the New Testament, and there's a piece of advice that we sometimes forget came from this same man who was blinded on the Damascus Road experience, that later he wrote in a letter to the Romans. He says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." Who better to tell us what it looks like to have your mind transformed, to no longer conform to the patterns of the world, than a man who was following the patterns of the world, a man whose life was around that, and a man who was truly changed by his experience. So that's where the journey with Paul starts today. That's not where it's going to stop. We're going to encounter some more of his ministry. But his ministry was all fueled by the same thing, a relationship with Christ. The relationship that changed for so many during that last week of Jesus' time on earth. The relationship that gets strengthened around a table, just like our relationships get strengthened around tables today. And this morning we come together as a church to gather around the table once again.